Chapter 19, Long-Awaited Return. As part of the Treaty of Al-Hudaybiyah, the Muslims were permitted to enter Mecca a year after signing the agreement. Once this length of time had passed, the Prophet and 2,000 of the growing Muslim community prepared themselves for the smaller pilgrimage. The group included believing men, women, and children, as well as 60 camels which would be sacrificed after the rites were performed. Hedging against any possible Qurayshi attempt to violate the treaty with violence, the Prophet took 100 horses and precautionary arms. Dressed all in white and proclaiming their submission to Allah, the Muslims set out from Medina toward Mecca, making the journey upon the call of Allah. The two men responsible for the horses and weapons traveled ahead of the Prophet for added protection. At about a day's travel outside of Mecca, they crossed paths with some from the Quraysh. The Quraysh were not expecting them to show up with such arms and pose some questions. The two Muslim men responded, "Allah's messenger, peace be upon him, will encamp here tomorrow, God willing." News of this development came swiftly to the Qurayshi chieftains, who worried, "We have certainly honored our promises. Why should Muhammad and his companions come to invade us?" A representative from their tribe was sent to the Prophet to ask, "Muhammad, we have never known you to break a promise ever since you were a young child. Do you wish to enter your hometown with all your arms when you have promised that you will come only with the armament of a peaceful traveler?" The Prophet responded, "I am not going to carry the arms into the city." Relieved, the Qurayshi representative said, "This is more like what we have known of your faithfulness." And yet, many who opposed Muhammad, peace be upon him, still could not bring themselves to embrace the faith of Islam. Before the Muslims made the final leg of the journey, some number of the Quraysh went to the mountaintops to see the Prophet do the small pilgrimage from afar. Most in Mecca knew that the Prophet had been away from the city for 7 years. Moreover, there was a rumor spreading that an illness had gripped Medina, and many of the Muslims, including Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, were in poor health, so much so that it was difficult for them to walk. The Prophet entered Mecca on his she-camel and was guarded by several of the Muslims. Before entering the area surrounding the Kaaba, Allah's house on earth, close to 2,000 Muslims repeated out loud and in unison, "There is no God except Allah alone. He has fulfilled his promise, given victory to his servant and dignity to his soldiers, and he has alone defeated the Confederates." Given that the Prophet was aware of the false rumor that had spread about the Muslims' physical condition, he said to them, "May Allah have mercy on everyone who shows them that he is strong." The Prophet and his companions came upon the Kaaba and first jogged around it for 3 laps in unison. They then walked around it several more rounds, each time completing a 360-degree counterclockwise circle, representing that all aspects of a Muslim's life revolve around Allah and the faith of Islam. The Quraysh were in complete dismay at seeing how vigorously the Muslims were performing this first rite, saying, "Are you sure that these people have been weakened by fever? They are jumping and running like deer." Then the Prophet rode his she-camel up and down the 2 historic mounts of Safa and Marwa near the Kaaba, totaling 7 rounds or 1.3 miles. He was emulating actions of Hajra, who ran between the mounts a long time ago in search of water for her son, Prophet Ismail, peace be upon him. He then stopped and said, "This is the place to slaughter your sacrificial animals, and all Mecca is such a place." The Prophet and his companions from Al-Hudaybiyah slaughtered the 60 camels from Medina in the name of Allah. Afterward, the Prophet and the men shaved their heads to conclude the pilgrimage rituals. When the time for the midday prayer arrived, the Prophet asked Bilal to go to the top of the Kaaba and give the call to prayer. Bilal called out firmly and in an enunciated manner, "Allah is great. I bear witness that there is no God except Allah. I bear witness that Muhammad is Allah's messenger. Rush to prayer. Rush to success. Allah is great." The hardliner Qurayshi were incredibly upset to witness Bilal, a former slave, climb the Kaaba, which contained the tribe's idols and statues. They viewed this as an affront to their ways and social order. Several of the polytheistic Quraysh said, I thank God that my father died before he could see this day with the son of Bilal's mother barking on top of the Kaaba. The Prophet and the Muslims remained in Mecca for a short time. They walked around the city and spoke to many of the non-believers. The inhabitants were pleasantly surprised to see how unified the Muslims were, despite the fact that prior to their acceptance of Islam, many of them were members of warring clans. It was clear to many of the people of Mecca how deeply committed the Muslims were to the cause of Allah and the Prophet. After 3 days, the Qurayshi leaders feared what type of influence the Prophet may have on their people and sent 2 men to the messenger to say, Your time is up and you have to leave. The Prophet tried to make a peaceful request to stay for a bit longer. The Quraysh retorted, You are required to leave. We appeal to you by God and by the covenant which exists between you and us to leave our land immediately. Your 3 days are up. One of the Muslims replied back, Liar! This is not your land, nor was it your father's. He will not depart from here unless he wishes to do so of his own free will. The Prophet diffused the situation and instructed his companion, Do not be so severe to those people. The Muslims departed and encamped several miles outside of Mecca. Nearly 20 years had passed, and the diminished, weakened Quraysh still clung to their stone and wooden idols, rejecting the message all that time despite the signs.